Long before modern HVAC systems, elderly people survived harsh winters with lungs that, by today's standards, should not have endured. Yet records from the late 19th and early 20th centuries show something counterintuitive. Doctors, caregivers, and households deliberately exposed older adults to cold, fresh air. Windows stayed cracked in winter, sleeping porches were common, and sick rooms were aired out regardless of temperature. This was not ignorance. It was learned behavior shaped by observation, epidemics, and survival. What they understood about lungs, air, and disease still matters today, especially for anyone studying historical living systems or preparing for low-tech resilience. Older generations recognized that warm rooms trapped more than heat. Coal stoves, oil lamps, candles, human breath, damp bedding, and cooking smoke all released particulates and gases into enclosed spaces. In winter, these rooms were sealed tight, turning them into slow poison chambers. Elderly lungs, already less elastic and less efficient at clearing debris, suffered first. Cold air entering through a cracked window diluted these contaminants continuously. Even a small exchange of air reduced carbon dioxide buildup, soot, sulfur compounds, and moisture. This was especially important at night when respiration slowed and rooms went hours without movement. Practically speaking, a modern viewer can apply this by prioritizing air exchange over constant warmth. Even in cold climates, opening windows briefly but regularly prevents the buildup of irritants that heating systems recirculate. For off-grid or winter survival scenarios, this principle reduces respiratory stress without requiring technology. Historical medical journals consistently noted that tuberculosis wards, influenza recovery rooms, and elderly convalescent spaces improved when exposed to cold outdoor air. The reason was not mystical. Cold air holds less moisture, and many respiratory pathogens thrive in warm, humid, stagnant environments. Elderly lungs are particularly vulnerable because their immune response in the airways weakens with age. Cold, fresh air reduced airborne concentration of pathogens and limited their survival time. Back during the 1918 influenza pandemic, open-air treatment centers actually reported lower mortality rates than those in closed hospitals. This practice, it carried on into elderly care well into the 1930s. Caregivers noticed fewer secondary infections when they aired out rooms aggressively, even when it was freezing cold outside. In practical terms, this is why ventilation is still so important during winter illness outbreaks. For those of us who like to stay prepared, it really just shows the value of managing airflow rather than depending only on heat or fancy filtration systems. As our lungs get older, the alveoli, those tiny air sacs, start to lose their elasticity and surface area. Oxygen transfer gets a bit less efficient, especially when the air is already low in oxygen. Warm, stagnant rooms tend to fill up with exhaled carbon dioxide, and that lowers the oxygen percentage over time. But cold outdoor air, on the other hand, has a higher oxygen density and actually encourages deeper breathing. Older folks would naturally breathe more fully in that cooler air, which helped improve their circulation and kept them from feeling so sluggish. Doctors of the era noted improved alertness, appetite, and sleep quality in elderly patients exposed to cool, fresh air. This was not comfort-based care, it was functional care. They accepted mild cold stress to preserve respiratory function. Applied today, this suggests balancing thermal comfort with respiratory efficiency. For anyone studying historical endurance or aging physiology, it explains why overheated environments often worsen fatigue and breathing issues in older adults. Moisture was the hidden enemy of elderly lungs. Warm rooms with poor ventilation allowed condensation to settle into bedding, walls, and clothing. This encouraged mold growth and chronic dampness, both of which irritated airways and worsened long-term lung conditions. Cold, fresh air reduced indoor humidity naturally. Even brief exposure dried fabrics and surfaces, limiting microbial growth. Historical housing designs reflected this understanding. Sleeping porches, high ceilings, transom windows, and cross-ventilation were standard features, not luxuries. These designs prioritized dryness and airflow over uniform warmth. For modern survivalists, this really reinforces why moisture control matters more than insulation alone. In winter shelters, preventing damp air buildup protects your lungs, your gear, and, well, your long-term health. Contrary to modern belief, cold air itself was not seen as dangerous. Folks back then understood that sudden chilling, especially when mixed with dampness and exhaustion, caused illness. Not cold air alone. Gradual exposure to cool environments actually strengthened respiratory muscles and improved circulation. Elderly individuals who were used to cold air adapted just fine, while those kept in overheated rooms often became fragile and breathless when exposed to the chill unexpectedly. This principle, lines right up with controlled cold exposure practices that are still being studied today. Historically, though, it came about through necessity rather than any kind of theory. When you put it into practice, it really shows that acclimatization matters. Keeping indoor temperatures just a little cooler, along with regular ventilation, reduces the shock during those unavoidable cold exposures and helps preserve respiratory adaptability. Understanding why elderly lungs preferred cold, fresh air isn't just nostalgia talking. It's a reminder that comfort technologies solved one problem but ended up creating others. Older generations put air quality, dryness, and oxygen above thermal uniformity. Their methods, well, they were crude but effective, shaped by observation and survival. For historians, this kind of thing changes how we look at domestic life, medical care, and even architectural design. And for preparedness enthusiasts, it offers up low-tech respiratory protection strategies that work without electricity, filters, or any modern infrastructure. So, if this kind of grounded historical insight matters to you, go ahead and subscribe to Warfield Prepper Chronicles, share this episode with folks who value real knowledge over convenience, and help keep these lessons alive before they're forgotten again.